And then for the final two segments of the day, we have the future of mining, an introduction, and then we're going to have a panel to follow that. But for someone who I don't think needs much introducing, but I'll introduce you anyway, we have Meltem Demirors, CSO of CoinShares.
Great. And why don't you come up? Yeah. All right. Woo! It's Friday. So, yep, go ahead and sit. So we were supposed to do 2 sessions, but it's Friday. We are the only thing between you and cocktails. So I thought instead of, doing a long, drawn-out session, it's going to be boring and dry, we'll make this fun and interesting. So what we are here to talk about, I have my amazing panelists here with me. So we have Steve Barbour, who you saw earlier today from Upstream Data. They're monetizing stranded natural resources and flare gas. We have next to him Dovey, who's partner at Primitive Ventures. They're a global crypto-native fund that's working on a lot of really interesting projects and also investing in companies as well. And then next to Dovey, we have John Belizaire, who's the CEO of Soluna, which is the world's first vertically integrated blockchain computing company that's building their first project in Morocco. So we have a wide range of companies represented, a wide range of perspectives. And then myself, you got to hear our head of research from CoinShares, Chris Bendixson, speak a bit earlier about the research we've done around mining. I myself come from the oil and gas industry. I spent a lot of time building out shale infrastructure, so onshore natural gas infrastructure here in the US, and then went into oil and gas M&A. And then went into crypto and started wondering, why is no one in crypto thinking about a lot of the things we think about in oil and gas, which is asset liability mismatch, So have been spending a lot of time thinking about not just mining, but also staking and just how we build computational networks in general. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give like a 2-minute intro, and then we have 5 topics we decided we want to talk about. So for each topic, I'll do a little intro, and then we'll kind of discuss it almost like a coffee chat, if you will. Sound good?
But
yes?
Where's the coffee?
All right. Okay, so let's get started. So this is the planet Earth, right? So imagine for a moment that this is Bitcoin, right? It feels very big to us, and it's complex, and there's a lot of different communities and cultures and locales, and it feels very large. But in reality, this is just one tiny piece of a broader universe, right? And this is a big universe, and there are a lot of different planets, and there's a lot of stuff going on, and it takes a long time to go from Earth to these other places, and they all are their own sort of microcosms. And you might maybe imagine that these things are other cryptocurrencies, or maybe they're other networks. And then we look at our galaxy, right? And you see that little red arrow like in the kind of the bottom there? That's our solar system, but it's part of this much larger microcosm. And I think one of the things that happens often in crypto, and particularly when you talk about mining, this has been the case for the last 6 years that I've been in crypto, we don't think about the broader macro context because this is not the only thing happening. This is a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of a much larger narrative that is unfolding. And so today what we wanted to do was talk about some of those larger themes that are unfolding in our world: politics, geopolitics, what's happening with energy efficiency, what's happening in our financial system, what's happening with the new institutional interest we're seeing in digital currencies, a lot of which is being led by our friends at Fidelity who are hosting. So hopefully we can take some of what happens in mining and translate it more broadly to what's happening in the wider galaxy. Does that sound good? Yes? Nobody's asleep yet. Okay. So money historically has represented localized value, right? So every little culture had its own money. And Bitcoin is really a way of forming shared memory, right? We have this distributed ledger, and really it's a record-keeping mechanism. So the security and reliability of the Bitcoin network, which I think everyone has now accepted, comes from the Bitcoin network, which is supported and secured through mining. And crypto doesn't exist inside of a microcosm, as you said. The Bitcoin network is still really, 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 really small compared to everything else happening in our world. So I just want to give you some numbers. I like numbers. Let's put this in context. So this year, we're going to mine about 1,800 Bitcoins per day, which means around 650,000 Bitcoins will be mined in the year 2018. That's worth $3.6 billion of Bitcoin at today's price. I estimated 5,500. I think we're 5,700, so allow me some wiggle room. And all Bitcoin in circulation are currently worth less than $100 billion. Okay, so that's Bitcoin. Let's talk about the gold market, right? If Bitcoin is digital gold, let's talk about physical gold. The physical gold market is $170 billion of trade per year, and there is over $7 trillion of gold in circulation. So Bitcoin is a teeny tiny fraction of gold. Now let's talk about the oil market. It's my favorite market. I love it. The oil market is $1.7 trillion per year of physically traded oil. That's 94 million barrels of oil per day. 94 million. It's a lot of oil. And the oil industry itself is worth trillions of dollars, right? Many of our favorite publicly traded equities have been built in this industry. So we're all here because we believe, like the oil industry and the gold industry, that Bitcoin is going to be a multi-trillion dollar industry. It's going to have a wide variety of companies that do exploration and production in the form of Bitcoin mining, provide services, and offer financial products and services to people who want to speculate on, invest in, or utilize Bitcoin. I think we all collectively share that belief. I think, do you? Yep. I think so, right? Okay, so the first question then is, just like we have challenges with energy production, how are we going to build a Bitcoin network that is efficient, uses renewables, and doesn't, quote unquote, boil the oceans? So this is a mining data center, and there are all of these devices. They're consuming a lot of electricity. And one of the themes that's going on in our planet is the fact that our current rate of energy consumption seems unsustainable. And this week alone, I think what's really interesting is there was a major ice shelf that broke, and one of the largest populations of Arctic penguins died, right? So clearly there is something happening in our world. So let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin boiling the oceans, not boiling the oceans. How do we build this communication network for Bitcoin in a way that is sustainable?
Yeah, so first of all, and I think like you said, Bitcoin is not green. It's a completely false argument. And like Meltem has said that like Bitcoin is actually, so Bitcoin itself, and so if we think about how we human actually form consensus, right? And then so we form consensus towards like multiple social institutions, right? And then so through either ethics or legal system or like military. And like the value of like US dollar, and I think the biggest difference here comparing Bitcoin with like barrel of oil and many other commodity out there, so like there's a big nuance there is like Bitcoin itself has no commodity value. Like basically it is like not going to be produced like something else. So basically it's like non-productive asset. It's just like gold. And then so basically why at the very beginning from like ancient history and then why we human beings actually pick gold as the store of value is because of like gold's a physical asset. First of all, gold is, so like 1 ounce of gold today worth like 1 ounce, so 1 ounce of gold like 1,000 years later, right? So it will never change. So it's very easy to have this certainty out there. And then also the gold is, golden, so it's shiny, and then so it's very easy to...
It is very shiny.
Yeah, so like you can easily distinguish from many other metals out there, right? So like that's why the consensus to form the value around gold. So it's actually it's relatively easier than like many other metals. So it's because of like gold, these are physical assets, and then like naturally be picked by just like our human society as like a store of value. So I think like we cannot compare Bitcoin as, like barrel of oil or like any other productive asset like land or like real estate. And then it's actually a form of like consensus like mechanism. And then so when we think about US dollar, and then so how much expenses like US government spend like to maintain the credit and then also the confidence of the government, like of the government's like competence in taxation, like that reflects in the value and confidence of like US dollar.
Bitcoin does consume energy.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So maintaining the Bitcoin network consumes energy.
Exactly. So like that's my point. So if you calculate the energy consumed by Bitcoin versus like how much we spend on military, in government, in all this like political bullshit, Bitcoin is actually it's super efficient. And also, I'm not sure like anybody here studied physics, and I have a very fundamental theory on like why Bitcoin is actually efficient from like thermodynamics perspective. And then we know that our entire human being, and then we actually try to fight entropy growth, right? Right? And then so like when like entropy grow to the max and then we die. And then like the whole universe, but like from Cosmos perspective, and then entropy has to grow.
Well,
because,
you need chaos to have order and order to have chaos.
Yeah, so
They're
like
sides of the same coin.
exactly. So like that's why what Bitcoin network has been doing is okay, like it's actually forming the consensus and then bring the order and then to fight the internal entropy growth, right? And then, but the thing is that at the macro level, our cosmos is actually expanding, and then like basically the general universe entropy is always positive, right? So like that's why in order to fight that single system's entropy growth, and you have to dump the entropy someone else. So like that's why there's no like decent like cryptography secure consensus that can form without any like energy consumption. So it's from thermodynamic perspective, it makes sense. It's scientific.
Okay,
actually.
so we started with the metaphysical, sort of philosophical, and I think there's a lot of work that's been done writing about the evolution of energy societies, and Bitcoin's really a way of transferring one form of energy into another form of energy, which is trust, right? Using mathematics and physics and
exactly.
reason. But let's talk a little bit about, I mean, both of you, Steve and John, you're thinking actively around energy efficiency, and you're trying to monetize in different ways trapped assets. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the project in Morocco and sort of what motivated you to build something like that?
Yeah, the genesis of Soluna is really thinking about sustainability. That's at the heart of what we're doing. We are looking at the problem on the renewable energy side. There was a great presentation this morning about what renewable energy looks like in the United States. When you look at it globally, it's actually a very small percentage of the power that's generated globally is driven from renewable sources. It's actually probably less than 20% or something like that. If I'm wrong, it's still fairly small. And one can ask the question, why is that? Why isn't there more renewable power? If you speak to a power engineer, which I do a lot these days, they will tell you that, well, renewable energy is just, it's intermittent, it's just not the best energy for the grid and so forth. So that's one side of the picture, and there's all these challenges with sort of doing that. Also, if you look at it from a financial perspective, the renewable energy space has gone through a tremendous growth. There was a period, in the last decade, plus or minus, that renewable energy was just like a major area of investment, and suddenly, and that was driven by governments basically
and then natural gas happened.
Yeah, and then natural gas happened. Governments actually started running out of money because they were sort of paying, power plants to produce power, whether they were using them or not. And so the whole space changed, and so now there's like this real, gap between capital available to develop renewable power, which would benefit the world from a sustainability perspective, but a challenge around business models where you just can't make enough, and you can't stand up power at scale and put it on the grid. Now you look at the computing side of the world, we're talking about Bitcoin using a lot of power. So it's, if you looked at it at an energy plant, it's about 5 gigawatts of installed power, 22 terawatt hours, annually of energy production into space. Data centers, high performance data centers, actually use 220 terawatt hours per year. So it's 10x the size of Bitcoin and blockchain related technologies. And so if you really think about those two worlds, you've got a problem. One is consuming energy. It's a growing space. You've got another space where the world needs more renewable power. Somewhere between those two worlds is a solution that could significantly change the way we see energy in the space. And I like to think of mental models. Think about sort of what Bitcoin really is. And I like the whole concept of Earth and the universe. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is the Bitcoin network is at the center of probably the next great infrastructure that we're building that we've never even seen before. This technology will power probably use cases that permeate the world. We're talking about digital assets And so when you look at that infrastructure, you're really talking about a global network of computing power to provide security to that infrastructure, which will manage trillions of dollars of assets. And so you need to place these things all around the world. Well, guess what? There's an incredible amount of renewable energy sources and sites that will never be built because there's no way to monetize those sites. But if you put Bitcoin operations there that have a real purpose, which is to drive the security of this future infrastructure, you can actually monetize those sites and use the excess power to power the grid, thereby creating an integrated cycle that can power sustainability for the Earth going forward.
What I'm hearing you say is you're going to take trapped energy, electrical energy, and convert it into another type of energy which has value in the form of Bitcoin.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to places where there are incredible renewable energy sites. So our site, our flagship site, is in southern Morocco. It is a 37,000 acre site. When I throw that number out, most people don't know what the hell that means. Think of twice the size of Manhattan is the site of this location. It is in an area on Earth. If you look at a wind map, and there's almanacs that show you sort of heat maps of where wind energy is, this is probably one of the reddest places on Earth. It has the ability to produce 900 megawatts of power. And some of the best athletes in the world go to this location because the wind travels so fast that they're able to perform and practice their Olympic skills. The wind moves about 22 miles per hour.
We're going to keep this brief.
Yes, I'm going to keep it brief.
We have
sorry.
more topics to discuss.
So 900 megawatts, big facility. So we take that site and we combine it with a series of computing capabilities, which now allows us to monetize that site. And then we put the excess power to power the Moroccan grid and beyond.
Bitcoin only, or
Yes.
Bitcoin
We're going to
only
start
for
with
now?
Bitcoin only because of the nature of the proof of work mining and so forth.
Because Bitcoin's the best form of value energy?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the way we look at it.
We can snuck that in there.
Focused on Bitcoin. But,
All right,
I
so
think,
how are we not going to boil the oceans? I know you talked about this in your talk quite a bit, but
yeah, I mean, I hope we establish today, like even with your project, in terms of renewables and the intermittent, nature, where they cannot follow load. That Bitcoin as a load bank, certainly being portable too, if you do need to move it from site to site, is a very efficient way to capture that waste. And that's like, curtailment will still happen to some degree, but it's going to capture.
here's a question though. So there is also, concurrent with Bitcoin being a way to consume trapped energy and transfer it, there is also battery technology being developed, right? And a lot of it's actually being developed here in Boston at places like MIT and other institutions. So say, for example, we develop a battery that is capable of storing vast amounts of energy and transporting it vast distances. Does that impact the ability for Bitcoin to be built out in this manner?
That's all, I think, all sort of speculative, like on
Sure.
if the battery technology today isn't that feasible for curtailing.
And not at scale anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there are use cases like, you read about in Australia that Tesla did this big facility, and I'm not an expert at what's going on down there, but it sounds like it's worked really well down there. But you don't generally see a lot of solar farms build out big battery infrastructure. You generally see them, solar and wind, but you see them build out with, often it's fossil fuels as backup. Like in Alberta, for example, a lot of the solar farms that are going up there, they're feeding directly into the grid, but they have backup power from I don't know, fossil fuels or coal or whatnot.
Right.
But the battery tech isn't quite there yet. So, I mean, if that happens, that's like the golden, that's the
We
golden
are entering
engineering.
the golden age of
That would be the golden
humanity,
age
though.
of engineering for sure.
But if you combine battery technology, like at the home, at the endpoint, and you combine Bitcoin with renewable energy development, then you can actually flip the grid on its head, where it's actually built for and optimized for renewable energy sources, which today it is not, which would certainly change the nature of energy globally.
So let's move to our next topic, because we have a few more we want to get through. Let's talk about a topic that Dovey touched on that I think is a really interesting one, which is geopolitics, cybersecurity, and the coming cyber arms race between national intelligence agencies.
Yeah.
So here we have some renewable photos, we have some flare gas. Okay, here's what I want to talk about. Over the last 20 years, the United States has spent over $4 trillion on wars intended to preserve its access to oil in places in the world where regimes were maybe turning against this sort of petrodollar concept. Similarly, what we're seeing in Bitcoin land, this is a picture from Venezuela. In Venezuela, a lot of people are tapping into the energy grid. As you know, Venezuela is a place that is endowed with a lot of natural resources. What the Venezuelan government's been doing is cracking down on people who are mining at home or who are mining in small-scale Bitcoin mining operations. And the claim of the government is that mining Bitcoin is a crime. It is a crime that includes money laundering, illicit enrichment, cybercrime, terrorist funding, exchange fraud, and damages to the national electrical system. This is interesting to see, and we're seeing this in other places around the world as well. There are some governments, in fact, that have seized Bitcoin. Obviously in the US, it happened during the Silk Road case. The US government auctioned those Bitcoins off. There are other nation states who own a large amount of Bitcoin because they've seized it and not auctioned it. And then, skipping ahead, we have DARPA. So DARPA, over the last few months, if anyone's been following what DARPA's been doing, they've been hosting sessions on the implications of cryptocurrency networks, particularly the resilience of the Bitcoin network for national security. And so that's something interesting to think about. If we think about security and communications, we have more and more problems with secure communications for governments. We look at WikiLeaks, everything that's happened in the Paradise Papers as late as last year, which touched on some of the goings-on in crypto land. And then lastly, we go to the topic of cybercrime. And again, I just want to give some rough numbers to give us some size and magnitude here. Cybercrime in 2015 costs the global economy $3 trillion. By 2021, that number is expected to double to $6 trillion. So we're talking here about trillions of dollars, tens of trillions of dollars being expended to maintain access to cheap energy sources. We're talking about trillions of dollars being spent to secure cyber networks, communication networks. We all know the internet was initially a DARPA innovation intended to enable more resilient, more secure, and more instantaneous messaging and communication. So let's talk briefly about what's happening on this geopolitical scale and what the implications of Bitcoin and mining in particular could mean. So who wants to take that? It's a big one.
Well, I don't think it should be surprising to see a state sort of act out against Bitcoin. I mean, the Bitcoin is a form of money that threatens their ability to, well, certainly print money. That is, a lot of people that are into Bitcoin are into the sound money aspect of it. And I mean, even on smaller scales at like local levels, you see it already in the U.S. You see, and in Canada and Montreal, you see utilities target Bitcoin miners for reasons that are unclear. I mean,
that happened in Washington State in the Rust Belt.
In
they shut down all
Washington,
mining.
and Montreal. Montreal just sort of reversed it. I've just read, but Bitcoin does consume a lot of energy, and some entities might feel threatened by that for whatever reason. But I think we should expect that to continue. And what we're probably going to see is that historically the cost to mine, like the cost per kilowatt, has been high. So if you invested $1 million into Bitcoin, maybe that would get you a megawatt worth of power. The cost per kilowatt is dropping. So in 10 years, $1 million investment into Bitcoin mining it might be double, triple, quadruple the energy consumption. So you're going to see the energy consumption spike. Like you can already see it when you trend it. It's actually going to increase exponentially with the price as the price increases.
But I think what I hear you saying is even the existence of Bitcoin and the fact that we've gotten to this point, it threatens the very existence of the petrodollar, which for all intents and purposes is what the 21st century has been based on, right? It's been shaped by that. Dovey, I know you have a lot of thoughts on that.
One last point. You just got to remember, this capital invested into Bitcoin, it's not additive. It's displacing other use cases. So I just consider, if people are willing to pay for Bitcoin for whatever reason that they subjectively find it valuable, it's displacing other businesses and uses for that capital that the market is not finding as valuable. It's just standard economics action happening. So.
Well, my favorite conspiracy is that Bitcoin was actually created by some government, but I think there are very profound implications for national security. So who wants to go next?
Yeah, so I will quickly touch base at geopolitical aspect from just at different angles. First of all, So like if the audience has gone through the 2017 like major China ban, like a lot of people are freaked out, but the thing is like people inside China like actually is pretty happy. And so first of all, once like China bans it, because of this like game theoretical dynamics between US and like China, US will not ban it for sure, right? Because the US will basically go all in for anything China bans.
Yeah.
And so that actually brings back the certainty of the whole industry. Yeah, seriously. And so like the second point is, so I grew up in China, mainland China, and I know how authoritarian like the whole like environment is. And so like interestingly, anything that Chinese government ban, the ban itself become the best publicity for that specific thing. Like including cryptocurrency, pornography, US dollar. And then basically whenever China wants to ban something, and so they have to broadcast it to all these TV station and like radio station. And then so after that major ban, and then so suddenly all the friends from my parents and ask me how
What
I
is
can buy
Bitcoin?
Bitcoin.
Yeah, what is Bitcoin?
Because
How do I get it?
because a local Chinese citizen understand that stock market can be fully manipulated, can be fully manipulated, and then housing market as well. And then basically, like the only freedom that they have access to, like without any permission, has to come from Bitcoin. Right. And then so like that's why the ban itself has zero impact, and it actually like trigger the whole bull market, right? So if we still remember, and so like what happened actually right after the ban is, okay, so there are a few exchanges shut down, blah, 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 and there's a few FUD for like 1 week, and just almost immediately all the transaction like turn into over the counter. Right. And then digital payment is very advanced like back in China. So as long as like you use WeChat Pay, I use WeChat Pay, and I basically send you renminbi, and then so I basically tell you what is the QR code of my public wallet address, and then so you basically just like send me Bitcoin. So that's why I think like cryptocurrency is just like water, and then it will flow into where the resistance is the least. Mm-hmm. And then so.
And we see this on local Bitcoins and other parts of the world
so,
whenever there's a macro event.
So like it's very hard to ban, so it's not bannable to be honest. And then also there's the other, like one last aspect I want to touch base on the geopolitical thing is, I think nowadays all the politicians, so unlike what we have for our founding fathers, but the current modern days politician, like their job is not to form consensus, like unless they're facing anything about life and death, right? So World War III and stuff like that. So which means at the end of the day, and our current economic system will collapse again. And then next time they will have Bretton Woods 2.0, probably in 50 years or 30 years, like, who knows. When they have the Bretton Woods 2.0, and then it's very hard for them to say, okay, now we use US dollar because US dollar has failed. Now we use euro. Because all this power dynamics makes them hard to rely on something that have full control by another sovereign state. And so I think like Bitcoin become this neutral zone.
Well, and I think that's what made gold so popular, right? Gold was a supranational store of value.
Exactly.
Similarly, Bitcoin is supranational. And I think a lot of people think Bitcoin competes with US dollars or Chinese renminbi. I don't think it does. It's an entirely different thing. And people will want both. People will want both. So we're going to move on to a topic. John, you're going to talk about this. Network resilience, because I'm looking at the clock and I want to get through all of these. All right. And you guys have so much good insight. I want to make sure our audience hears it. So let's talk about network resilience and durability, especially in areas where infrastructure is deprecated, underdeveloped, or in the case you described in Morocco, it may be economically infeasible to build. Mm-hmm. So if we talk about the world today in the year 2019, it's actually a great year for everyone living on this planet. People without access to electricity worldwide has fallen to under 1 billion, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment. And 4 billion people, or half the world's population, are now using the internet. So if we think about the two things people need to run a Bitcoin client, they need power and they need access to the internet. So that's good. But we know firsthand that access to the internet is not easy to find and infrastructure is not always readily available. This is a store in India that provides power and internet. It's called a power internet cafe. And here's an example of what happens even in the US. Power will go out because of natural events. And then this is an example of something that happened several times this year. AWS goes out. what are you going to do when all of your data centers go out? And this happened down the entire East Coast, and we learned some of the challenges of relying on infrastructure that is heavily dependent on one particular locale or one particular sort of power output. So let's talk a little bit. You're building high-performance computing centers. So how are you going to keep the Bitcoin network running and operating in an environment that's increasingly unpredictable and sometimes very challenging to operate in? So talk to us about that.
Well, I mean, Bitcoin is designed to be resilient. It's a global peer-to-peer network with full replication of all data. It has the ability to access power in any location where the power is available. So one of the visions that we have as a parent company, if you will, every project is a subsidiary, is to build these sites around the world that become, fully integrated peers, where there's a power plant, there's a computing center that's providing access for the local area, Bitcoin mining as well, and you combine that with 5G networks, and suddenly you've got these sort of micro computing centers around the world that creates a tremendous amount of resilience. So if there's a power or computing outage in one location on the planet, you can get to another location on the planet through a global network that's powered by this design. And one of the pictures you showed where there was this very rural area that has no power, that can be completely eliminated if we build this sort of global internet fabric. I wrote a blog on it. I called it renewable energy might be the next infrastructure inversion. So there's this whole concept about how things start out sort of you're not sure and whether this is really going to take off. We don't really know whether BTC is going to be a global platform, and suddenly something occurs that accelerates that technology, and then all infrastructure is actually flipped on.
But what's so
to support
interesting
that.
to me is Bitcoin has become this amazing incentive to the point a few people have made today in their talks to go out and to develop these underdeveloped
That's right.
assets or resources.
Yeah.
And so in a way, I think it's amazing to think about the idea that Bitcoin and the facilitation of the Bitcoin network could be one of the things that actually continues to spread electrification
That's
and
right.
the development
Globally
of more
around the world.
robust
Yeah.
networks.
And we're excited because we're starting in Africa, and Africa is sort of the last frontier for energy investment and capital,
many
just about
things. Many
anything.
things, yes.
But if you talk to any large infrastructure fund, and we've talked to a few of these funds, and these funds have hundreds of billions of dollars in aggregate available to go build plants around the world, and they're all looking at Africa. So they're like, that's where we got to go. That's where
Well,
the
now if
minerals
they
are.
mine Bitcoins, right, and
Yeah.
Bitcoin
Yeah, I
becomes
mean-
extremely valuable, they're going to be
Exactly.
sitting on a lot more resources.
That's right. So
it's
now
a
they're
nice
going to they've never seen this combination before.
No.
The only business model they know of is you build a plant, you connect it to the grid. But there's no grid. Like, how do you, where's the power going to go? So now it has some place to go while the grid develops, and then the excess power, or they can bring the Bitcoin piece down and expand power. I think it's a recipe for really changing the
Well, and what
the
you're
landscape
talking
of
about there
resilience.
is also a new financing model,
Yes,
right? Where all
absolutely.
of a sudden you have
Exactly.
a new revenue stream, and it's
Yeah.
one that's driven by these market forces
That's right.
that are Austrian market forces.
Exactly,
so instead
exactly.
of relying on
It'll become a
constant-
thing, I
Yeah,
would
no
say.
helicopter money.
Exactly.
Bitcoin.
I think the main point, on this subject, is Bitcoin mining is a perfect form of energy arbitrage, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's the key words, and I think Andreas Antonopoulos has really promoted that aspect of it. But I mean, kilowatt hour in Iran has the exact same value as one
That's right.
kilowatt hour in Canada.
Yep.
Right. Completely different economic situations. One country might even be sanctioned. They could burn their oil and mine Bitcoin. There's ways to get around this kind of thing now. So
I
that
do
is-
believe
that's one of the
that
most
the
powerful
U.S.
aspects.
Treasury, for the first time ever last year, sanctioned, or they put on the OFAC list 2 Bitcoin wallet addresses. It's pretty amazing, right?
amazing,
It's the first
yeah.
time in history we've actually
They
seen
realized
Bitcoin
it.
wallets put on the terrorist watch list. But, sorry, continue.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just one of the powerful parts of Bitcoin. It's very, very difficult to shut down. I mean, I don't know if anyone has really conceived of a strong argument on how it could be shut down. And that's a really powerful thing to any group of people, no matter what your intent is.
Well, let's ask Dovey. I mean, I feel like in China, the government has done a really good job with the firewall, right? So we like to think that access to the internet is unlimited, but the internet has actually become one of the most centralized places in the world. So what do you think?
Yeah, so I think that's one thing actually different, right? And because, so when we think about the network partition, just like in mainland China, and so because of we have all these like edge servers, and so that's actually the physical server, right? The physical server and then manufactured by like Cisco, Huawei. And so like the Chinese government can actually go to the Huawei executive or the Cisco executive saying, like I want to have this like software like on the server no matter what, right? And
Right.
so because like I think the beauty of like Bitcoin is like the team behind it, or like just like we just like every of us, we are Satoshi, right? So like there's no Satoshis out there that can be so they can be identifiable as like a single team or as like a single person. So like that's why so like it's basically non-seizable. And then just like John has mentioned this, and I personally think that even within China, like Bitcoin mining so far is what I have seen the capitalism at work. It's like a very efficient market. And so like, and then like local government don't want to ban like Bitcoin mining because it's as simple as, okay, we have all this like excessive like just hydropower over like rain season, and I want to so like what are you gonna do with that? And I want to produce more like just like tax and then more jobs, and so like that's why. And I just allow Bitcoin mining at the local scale, and so why not, right?
It's hard to say no to profits. So.
Yeah,
We're making
exactly.
a generation of world leaders who are all Bitcoin maximalists because of capitalism.
And then like the other thing is like Bitmain has manufactured this like container miner. So I'm not sure like you guys ever bought up like any of those. Basically, it's like a standard container, but like with all the racks inside. And then so you can easily ship the container and chase after the electricity.
We do that better, by the way. Just
Oh, okay, yeah. So like John, they did it better. So because I've only seen the Bitmain version. So
John, you need to go to China.
Just joking, Bitmain's great.
No, but I think, this isn't unique to China, but what they've been able to do over the last 20 years is really combine an incredible ability to control things and generate profit and grow their economy at the same time. And anytime you have an environment like that, I'm actually surprised that they're trying to ban it, because they should just be trying to figure out how to control it. And they're like, we don't know how to control this thing. And so it's really sort of throwing them off. But I want to give you an anecdote as it relates to Morocco, for example. It's actually a very closed economy in Morocco. So there's a Moroccan currency that doesn't have full convertibility to other currencies, and it's a way to sort of protect their ability, and it allows them to manage the monetary system very carefully. And one of the things that we had to do was talk to the central bank about what we're doing in the country, and we're talking about the fact that we're building this incredible site in southern Morocco and generating Bitcoin. And the one question they had was, are you actually making Bitcoin here in the country? Because if you are, then our people might get access to the Bitcoin, and that will be a way for them to get their assets out of the country and so forth. And we had to explain to them that actually Bitcoin doesn't actually, appear here. It appears someplace else.
There's no physical Bitcoins.
Yeah, there's no like
coming out of the
stuff,
ground.
And my pitch always includes that if you come to our facility, it'll be nice, gleaming lights and everything, and we'll have a gift shop, and you won't be able to buy Bitcoin there. You can buy hats that have Soluna logos and stuff like that. And they crack up.
I think if you call BTCC, they're still making the Bitcoin
Yeah. I didn't want to tell them that.
One
but,
Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other question they ask is, well, where is Bitcoin? Where is it based? Like, where is the main office of this company that that does this? And it says, well, there is no main office. It's a global.
How does that conversation go?
Oh man, that's really hard. I've had it like 4 or 5 times already, and I'm just constantly sort of explaining to them that there is no sort of sovereign base of this technology. It's just a global network that is going to enable a whole host of things. And so what I found interesting is, even though they're incredibly protective and want to control things, they still are open-minded to what this could mean for their country, the African continent, and the technology's role in their government going forward. So they're really allowing us to sort of move forward, and they bring me in every now and then. John, so one more time. So
Right. Who's the CEO of Bitcoin?
Yeah, exactly. Who's the CEO and all this kind of stuff.
Sure.
But even the head of the central bank, who is probably one of the well-known and becoming sort of well-recognized as one of the best managers, is recently made a statement during a sort of meeting of the central banks, heads of all the world, that he believes we must keep an open mind to this new phenomenon.
So that's rare, because I had a
Yes.
dinner with a lot of central bankers, European central bankers, and the individual who runs the Bundesbank, which is Germany's central bank, said to me, you cannot have Bitcoin. You cannot have your own currency because you do not have an army. And my response was, have you been on Twitter? Hopefully you find that humorous.
Yeah. Fiat currency is like, you will take this money,
But this is exactly the challenge, I think. So we are just about out of time, and I want us to get to the cocktails. But before we do that, I've pushed us to move at a very rapid pace in this conversation. But as we think broadly about the opportunity, the development and growth of the Bitcoin network, so we've had 1 decade of growth in the Bitcoin network, and it's looked one way. And I think the next decade is going to look completely
Totally
different.
different,
I am incredibly excited about it. Maybe one prediction, one thought, what might the next decade bring in terms of the development of the Bitcoin network itself, where the protocol meets physical space and computational space?
Nice
One development that nobody's thinking of that you think will fundamentally change the face of the Bitcoin network? Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I can go. I mean, I don't think anything too fundamental will change with the protocol and the rule set. I do think we can expect, we just came, the last bull run we just came off of in 2017, that was the first time we went through a bull run after ASIC industrialization. Before that, it was just sandbox. We're just playing in a sandbox. The next bull run we enter, which I think is inevitable, I don't know when it'll be, I think that's going to really start to shake the system pretty hard, because the energy demand that's going to come from that is going to really start putting pressure on other energy users. And I mean, I personally think, I've said it all day, I think that's a good thing. I think Bitcoin energy use is highly efficient. But there's other, I think about some other weird things that come with that, and not to sound negative about things, but you even see power theft today, under Bitcoin's,
Well, when I was
college
at
kids
MIT, we would
stealing
mine
the power
Bitcoin
from
in
the
dorm
dorm.
rooms, right? You get free power from the university,
So
plug a miner. There
you
go.
could probably expect to see more of that stuff, and it's probably going to get a bunch of bad press on that case, but
I actually had to stop running. So I'm an investor in Casa. I have a Casa node in my office. Before that, I had a bit seed and a 21 computer. I had to stop running it because they kept blocking our IP address because we were consuming so much computational power. They were like, what are you doing in your office? I was like, oh, we're running a Bitcoin node. They're like, no, you're not. All right, Dovey, one prediction.
I think one prediction I have is just the Beijing government, just the China government in general, and I think they will actually regret on opt out of the game, right? So right now they literally just opt out, right? So just ban everything, and then everything is illegal. But the reason why they will regret is very simple, because the Chinese reserve, so this China, so the PBOC, so the China Bank, so the People's Bank of China, so there's a FAC equivalent, and they have been trying really hard to have this de-dollarization, right? Because China for a long time has been shipping out all these shoes and clothes and in exchange for US dollar.
Right.
And it has a large reserve on US dollar and then just US sovereign debt. And then, but that become actually the weakest link for China's economy. So I think they're relatively dumb to just opt out of the game, and because Bitcoin and cryptocurrency itself is the best approach to get rid of US dollar and just a USD asset in general. So I think in probably 5 to 10 years, and then they will probably realize that. And then once they realize that, and we will see a bigger conflict and just a cyber conflict, of all this, just like power consumption and power game, and then just like the protocol game and stuff like that. So that's my.
So we're going to move from competing for petrodollars to competing for crypto dollars.
Yep.
I think what a lot of people don't realize in this room is that everyone is competing with Bitcoin miners. Like everyone, it's a free marketing competition, and there's really no way to stop it unless someone figures out how to stop Bitcoin itself. So.
Amanda
It's
just
something
gave
everyone
me
should be
the
considering.
drinking sign. So John,
My prediction is that in a decade, we will stop referring to the Bitcoin network completely. It'll just be this quiet thing that sort of hums underneath this incredible wave of innovation, and we'll be talking about things like applications that are like Facebook, WhatsApp, that sort of thing, and won't even refer to.
I hope it's not Facebook and WhatsApp. I
Yeah,
hope
me
it's
too,
10
actually.
10 times better.
I just couldn't think of a name like the John app or something like that.
John app.
That you won't eliminate. Just like we don't refer to the internet anymore because it's just an infrastructure piece.
All right, well,
That's
thank you
global.
to the three of you. Hopefully that gave you some inspiration. Hopefully it's fun to pontificate about the future. I think we're all going to drinks so we can continue the conversation there.
So that concludes today's program. FCAT wants to extend a special thank you to all of our speakers and panelists from today. A lot of them traveled pretty far to be here to share their insights with the group, so thank you to them. And last but not least, a special thanks to Amanda Fabiano and Nicole Dodas for putting on this event. It's a huge amount of work, and they absolutely knocked it out of the park. And thank you to all of you for coming. Please join us downstairs for drinks. Thank you.